Coming up, the Connecticut economy and the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, and a lot more on this edition of Meet the Leaders. And hi there, welcome to Meet the Leaders. I'm David Smith. Along with me today from the 25th District is Senator Bob Duff, representing Darien and Norwalk. It's always great to see you, Senator. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You have weathered the summer all right, even the oyster slurping contest at the Oyster Festival most recently, and none the worse for wear, apparently.
No, I have to say we have one of the best MCs out there for the for the slurping contest, and a fine judge at that as well. Unfortunately, it wasn't my year this year to win, but it's still a fun thing to do.
Well,
and I have to
keep practicing.
I'll keep practicing. But personally, oysters are not my favorite food. I can eat clams. I like lobster. So if they had a lobster eating contest with some warm butter, I think I definitely win that.
Do
contest.
A lot better at that, huh?
Absolutely.
All right, we'll suggest that for next go round. You know, when you have some time off, and not that you have very much time off, this is a citizens' legislature, and I don't quite understand that, because the work that you all put in, with all due respect to anybody who scorns legislators, you all just put in unbelievable amounts of time in a part-time capacity. And summer comes between sessions and so forth, and I suspect that you get put upon by all your constituents along the way. What are people saying to you these days? What are you hearing from them?
Well, we were in session from January to June, and we're not back in session again until February, unless we get called into some sort of a special session. And, if we don't get called into special session this year, it'll be the first time in many, many, many years that we haven't, and we all hope that we don't. But what ends up happening is we go back to our districts, we go back to our jobs. I've been doing real estate now for 17 years, and you juggle that during the legislative session and during the off session. Hopefully go back to that full time. But constituents still contact you. Problems still arise. Meetings still happen. I'm on a task force that's meeting during the interim on puppies and puppy mills and things like that. So there's always work to do, and there's always you always still want to be responsive and still want to be visible to your constituents and let them know some of the things we've accomplished this session, hear what's on their minds, and hopefully be prepared for next session so that you can do that. And also, you want to recharge with your own batteries and spend time with your family and, again, your jobs and that kind of stuff. So it's a different pace when you're not in session, but you're still busy.
That's an interesting point you made, that task forces and you and the rest of your colleagues are all involved. So, I mean, you're not really away from things. You're just doing it in different areas and with different people.
Absolutely. And even some of the, this was my first year as the Senate Chairman of the Energy and Technology Committee, and there's a lot of things in the bills that we passed that are being implemented as we speak. So I'm been on the phone quite a bit with the governor's office, quite a bit with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and others to do that. Also, I'm on the Regulations Review Committee, and that's the only committee in the legislature that meets 12 months out of the year. So we have a meeting set every single month. So generally once a month I'm at least up at the Capitol. I'm on appropriations, and we have work to do that we do in the fall for various things. And so there's always things to do, and there's always pressures out there, but that's okay. I still love the job, and I still love doing the work I do, so I don't mind it.
I want to delve into both those items, or all of them along the way if we can. Most recently, you've been involved with the food pantry. The reality is that the economy is not great here in the state of Connecticut, with a higher unemployed number than the national average. And people are having a tough time just putting food on the table, and that's increased the need for these food pantries, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing a turnaround of the economy, and we are seeing a growth of jobs, but obviously we want to see it faster, and people are still struggling, and we want to make sure that we're cognizant of that as well. Good news is that we've seen the percentage of foreclosures going down. They continue to go down. and the real estate market is getting stronger every day. We're seeing multiple offers on houses and things like that. So we do see an improving economy. We're growing jobs probably at the fastest clip in this state since the last 15 years. So those are all good things, but we don't want to say that everything is great, and so therefore we're going to now think that everybody is benefiting from an economic recovery when we know for sure that that's not the case. So yeah, I was part of the on the board that combined Christian Community Action and Person to Person with a merger that brought Person to Person from Darien and did an expansion to Norwalk, and they had an opening that changed the building that used to be Christian Community Action and how they do things and their intake centers. Diageo did everything pretty much. They spent all the money on fixing everything, gave them a grant, and it's really going to be wonderful. We do see a lot of people who still need help in making sure they have food on the table. And for instance, Cablevision helped me out along with other media as well when I got the word out about 200 kids who needed backpacks. We had kids who graduated Head Start program and were entering kindergarten, and many of their parents couldn't afford backpacks and basic supplies for them. Now, that's an easy one. I mean, most people will say, wait a minute, that shouldn't be the case. Every kid should have the ability to go to school and have the things that they need. So thankfully, when we got the word out through the media, the community responded really well and helped. So again, from a standpoint of what do I do legislatively when we're not in session, those are the things you kind of do. You keep your ear to the ground. You try and help out. You use kind of the bully pulpit of your office to a certain extent and try and do good for those who need it and make sure that you're always out there and doing what you need to do.
Are the donations to food pantries where they should be or where they can be?
Well, I think there always can be more, and I think here's the thing: is that there's more need, and what we've seen over the past few years with this recession was that people who used to be the donors are now the receivers. So I think that if people can give, they do. But we have really generous people. Anytime I've ever done an event and I've asked people to bring a can of food, many times people bring 5 cans or 10 cans. The Postal Service does a great thing once a year with you leave food by your mailbox, and then other entities do the same thing. So I think they can always use more, and you don't want to have it as a stressful situation. Another really great nonprofit we have in Norwalk is called Community Plates, and what they do is they do food rescue. So, for instance, they have partnerships with I know Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and others, and even some restaurants where they take food like bread that maybe for the store they would get rid of, but it's still perfectly good. It's not doesn't taste bad or anything else, and they rescue that food. Instead of going into the garbage, they bring it to the senior centers or the food pantries or other places, and people can then take that. So it's amazing, kind of the waste that we have in one way when we still have a lot of hungry people, and Community Plates is kind of trying to bridge that gap. And they have an app, so they're very technologically advanced. I predict that they're going to go national one day. So it's an excellent organization as well.
On the other end of the food spectrum is the lobster business.
Right.
And it's a strange juxtaposition there, but to be sure, used to be a huge business in the state of Connecticut, and has dwindled to a perilous few because of the die-off and so forth. And even those who are still left, and I mean literally a handful, don't feel that they're getting the kind of support from the state that they'd like to see. Right.
Well, it all comes down to jobs, David. And if more people are working and have jobs, the less people are going to be at the food pantry. Right. So what happened was over the last few years with some of the chemicals we've been using, we found have not been very good for lobsters, obviously. There's a lot of reasons why there's been a lobster die-off, I think, in Long Island Sound. Some of it could be global warming. Some of it could be some of the chemicals and maybe some other types of things. But one of the things that we thought was important to do, and we passed it this year, was a ban on methropene chemical in going into Long Island Sound. And we found that that chemical really does do harm to lobsters, and that may be one of the reasons why we have the die-off. The lobstermen have been fighting for that for years. We were finally able to get it past the goal line this year, and with the support of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Our only problem at this point is not what Connecticut's doing, because Connecticut's doing the right thing, but it's really New York. We were trying really hard to get New York to ban the chemicals as well.
They're not on the same page with the
They
chemicals.
have not been on the same page as us, and that is completely frustrating. And also, when there was spraying going on years ago, we didn't spray over Long Island Sound. In New York State, they did spray over Long Island Sound too, so those chemicals went down into the sound. We all talk about and want a clean, healthy sound. Obviously, nobody wants encephalitis or any other type of mosquito illness, and we know that there's better chemicals out there that's safer not only to people but also to the marine life that's in Long Island Sound. So it's a balancing act, but we don't want to put that chemical in very close to Long Island Sound. So it's really a balance out there for us.
Really is. There's just a few folks who have been in that business for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And they're on the brink of extinction themselves,
Right.
even though the lobsters are coming back.
Right. Well, here's how I look at it: is that just like the oystermen and the clammers and everybody else who are out there, they're farmers, and many of them know. We have to give them more credit than they get for kind of knowing instinctually what's going on out there. So, for instance, if there was a die-off on some farm or farms in Northeast Connecticut, there would be a huge investigation. We'd be banning things all the time. We'd be doing whatever we got to do. But because it's Long Island Sound and because we can't always see what's there, I think sometimes we don't then understand exactly what's happening. We don't give credit to the people who live this day in and day out like we should. So we need to listen better to those farmers who are farming Long Island Sound and take some of their advice.
Well, to that end, the Good Wives River restoration seems to be one of those areas that is being focused on and is having some beneficial result.
Right. There's going to be some state money coming to that as well. My friend and colleague, Senator Carlo Leone, has been very instrumental in helping with that as well. We both represent Darien, so it's kind of a joint venture, but he deserves a yeoman's credit for that because he's done really an outstanding job on that, and so have the residents in that area to try and restore that pond and make in the river. And
What is happening there? What has happened there that has caused this difficulty?
Well, I think it's going to be some of it's going to be because it hasn't been maintained in a long time. I think there's it needs to either be dredged or there needs to be some sort of work done over there, and it's not flowing in the way that it needs to flow. And you know, sometimes over years, because of either overdevelopment or different chemicals adding into the water, you know, things die off, and you really that doesn't help. And again, it doesn't help the economic output of the area.
Sure.
It pollutes, and people don't, and the values don't remain high. So I'm glad that it's a small grant, but I'm glad that it's there, and I think the people in the area are going to be very thrilled when that gets done.
Is it enough to do the job that's necessary?
I think it is,
as
yeah.
you see it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's some good
so.
news in itself. One of the outfits that has certainly made everybody more aware, and young people in particular, of the sound and the need to take care of it and so forth, is the Norwalk Seaport Association. And just having finished up their annual Oyster Festival that on one of the most beautiful weekends that anybody could possibly come up with. Of course, had the tragic incident with this swing ride, Zoomer or whatever it's called. Any further word on any insights as to the how, what, where, and why? Fortunately, the injuries were, there were injuries, but nowhere near what people had speculated upon the initial happening, thank goodness. So.
Oh, I know. I mean, you hear things like mass casualties.
Yeah, people panicked out of sorts and scared everybody away when it was being taken care of as best as could be done.
Right. I mean, you think about it. Nobody ever wants tragedy, but that's why you have police there, firefighters,
sure.
EMS there. They're all there on site. So if for instance, if that happened at a much smaller carnival, it would have taken a long time not a long time, but it would have taken longer for emergency personnel to get there. At the Oyster Festival, they were all there on site, so it probably was a matter of seconds before our first responders got there. And thankfully, again, that nobody's hurt. I mean, I was telling my wife about it. We were home at the time when I saw that it happened, And she started crying, because you think about, you know who's on those rides, they're kids.
Of course.
And when you just don't know what's happening, I mean, my gosh, it's scary for any parent or anybody to think about that. I think the Oyster Festival handled it well in the sense that they had everybody there. I think they tried to communicate the best that they could. A lot of information wasn't forthcoming because nobody knew. It's really up to this point state investigators and to Stewart Amusement Company to kind of figure out, and even the manufacturer of that ride, to figure it out. What I do know is that the state has rigorous inspections prior to opening of these amusements and rides, and they did get everything got re-inspected again and passed. I don't know any of the folks at Stewart Amusement, but generally haven't heard any complaints about them, and I think they have a pretty impeccable record. So, my thing is that from a policy standpoint, we just want to make sure that the rules and regulations are as tight as they should be, and that we ensure safety and that we're keeping things updated as best as possible. But other than that, anytime you go on a ride, there's always a risk, albeit a small one, but a risk. Let's try and make sure those risks are minimized and that
I think a lot of people got very scared because of some of the media really blew it out of proportion, and when you start throwing words like casualties and kids in Connecticut around, people start thinking immediately Sandy Hook, all kinds of the worst possible scenarios you could possibly come up with.
Yeah.
And fortunately, it was not that situation. So
no, it's scary for sure.
But it is certainly scary, no question about it. Well, we got a lot more to chat about, campaign finance reform, and a whole lot more. We're glad to have you with us. Thanks so much for taking some time with us. State Senator Bob Duff, our guest on this edition of Meet the Leaders. I'm David Smith. We'll take a break. We'll be right back with more then. And we're back on Meet the Leaders. Hi there, I'm David Smith. With us from the 25th District, State Senator Bob Duff, representing Darien and Norwalk. We talked about a number of things, but with having just come off some primaries, we've got elections coming up in certain areas. Not for you all, so you're breathing a sigh of relief, you and your colleagues.
Somebody asked me why I look so relaxed.
Yes, exactly. Next year at this time, who knows? But in any case, campaign finance reform is one of those things that came to the fore recently, and to some people it seemed a little strange that Democrats should have been supporting this thing that seemingly opened up floodgates of more finance from large entities.
Right.
How did you take it?
Well, I don't think so. We're getting barraged by the Citizens United decision that the Supreme Court ruled on. I mean, it's a shame that federally anyway, that companies or individuals can anonymously donate and then unlimited amounts of money and then influence races, whether it's a federal race or even a state race. And we certainly expect that. It actually happened last year in the presidential election. There was these super PACs that came after 3 state senators. So, a guy who didn't even live in Connecticut was funding these super PACs to defeat candidates he didn't even know, rather than let the democratic system work on its own. So we have in Connecticut, after the Rowland scandal, we put forth a very good and solid system of campaign finance and publicly funded elections, and it was a model across the country. But once Citizens United came, and we still have that, but once Citizens United came, it kind of set the reset button on the rules, and it kind of strings us up a little bit, ties our hands from a standpoint of you have a limited amount of money you can spend, and then you got these guys can spend $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 per seat, and then try to influence the election and say things, and then you're tied with one hand behind your back. You can't respond to it. So we had to make some changes so that at least there's disclosure, and that there's a better ability for us to respond. Now, this is not just for Democrats; it's for Democrats and Republicans or any other type of candidate who's out there, because you just I think for anybody who's listening to me right now, and if I said, look, there may be somebody in Missouri or Texas or Florida or wherever who's trying to influence my race here in Norwalk or Darien, and just writing checks, unlimited amounts of money, is that really what is intended? When, if each candidate is part of the public financing system has the same amount of money, and that's how you're supposed to make sure there's fair and honest elections, at least there's a voice, everybody has a voice. How does that make sense?
Has there been anybody from another state that has had any input financially? I mean, notable financial input as to state races, senator,
Oh, absolutely.
representative?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
big
absolutely.
money
Yeah, absolutely.
inputs?
Yeah, during last year we had three state senators who were targeted, and it was late when they did this.
Wasn't just the federals; it was the states.
States. Yeah, yeah. And these super PACs have done the same thing in Kansas. They've done it in South Carolina. They have, I believe, they've done it in some other states as well. So it's out there. And
so this was an answer to Citizens United to.
Plus, you want some disclosure. Yeah, you want to know who is donating to these people. Now, there's only so far we can reach because we can't reach on the federal level. But we want to make sure in Connecticut, at least, we have some disclosure on how these things are going.
Well, I think
it's scary, though. It's very scary.
Well, it is. When, as you say, a few years ago, we had kind of the state of the art in the campaign finance reform, and to kind of massage that and open it up more, it just didn't seem.
Well, an open and fair election is really the principle and hallmark of our system. And when you have some other organizations that can really go around all the rules that we have and can try and buy an election or influence an election in a way that is really outside the limits of what we have been doing for hundreds of years, that kind of stuff makes me nervous about our core system that we
Interesting.
have. Yeah.
We are now a year out from Sandy, a couple from Irene. There are still, especially further up the coast than you represent, but still some folks I know down in the Harbor View area and all through there that are still bearing the brunt of Sandy, still not in their homes.
Oh, yeah.
And hoping to pick up the pieces and get it squared away, either raise them up or do whatever they have to do.
Right.
But it's still a real problem.
It is a problem, and I know a friend of mine who just moved back into her home yesterday from Sandy down in Harborview. So people are, and the clubhouse down in Harborview still is kind of a disaster. But I have to say, as much destruction as there was down in, say, Harborview and other places, the spirit of the folks who were there really was magnificent. I mean, the best part of the whole thing about it, all the tragedy and everything else, the destruction and everything else, was really how people came together. And that at least gave everybody a little bit of a lift, because people were really helping each other instead of just every man for himself kind of a thing. So I was pleased at that. And I was pleased at how the governor and the federal government had really pushed real hard to make sure that we got some aid here. It's going to be a while before this stuff, before everything is ironed out from Sandy and even Irene, and some of the other storms we've had. But in some of the legislation we did this year, for instance, just as an example, our big comprehensive energy strategy bill, we had a provision in there about tree trimming, and because we know when those big storms come, the power goes out, obviously. And some of it is because trees are not trimmed, they're not taken care of, they fall on the lines and everything else. One of the biggest complaints we get. So we were able to put forth a kind of a statewide policy on tree trimming, where we had the environmental folks working with utility companies, and they came up with a compromise and a process on how.
Yeah, you're darned if you do and darned if you don't.
Well, the first draft of it was a little bit Edward Scissorhands like, which after a storm, I think everybody's pretty much of that mindset. Just chop the trees down. But cooler heads prevail, but there is a responsibility for people and towns and the state to be responsible with their trees and to make sure that everything's getting maintained, and that you do have to keep those wires free of impediments. And we also have to harden the wires. We have to maintain the poles. Lots of things to do. All that stuff is happening as a result of some of the legislation.
Let's keep the hurricanes down. It's been a good
well,
year
that would be
so far.
that would be yeah. I mean, we can pass legislation about tree trimming. I can't pass legislation about no hurricanes.
Not yet.
Though I'd like to.
Recently coming to light is a medical alert scam, an offering that sounded too good to be true and indeed was too good to be true.
Right. Yeah, well, the stupidest thing these folks do is they call me and they leave messages on my voicemail. And so, to all the scammers out there, don't leave message on the state senator's home phone.
Or we'll find you faster.
Right, right. But generally when that happens, I will check it out with the police, or if I get a call. I mean, I had gotten a call even a month or two earlier with a woman who called, and she was all upset about somebody offering a free Medicare card, or they saying it was coming from Medicare, about they needed to send a new one because of the healthcare laws, which is complete bogus.
Right.
And this other one with this other scam left a message on my machine. I forwarded it to the Norwalk Police Department, detective I know, Bill Maloney, and he said, no, this is a complete scam. And which I figured, and he said it's been going all the way even into Texas,
probably
all
out of
across
state,
the country.
right?
Oh, so and that's the problem with us, from a standpoint of either those calls that come in or the other or scams, is that it's very hard for us to prosecute or even go after, because they may not be in the state, they may not be in the country, they could be someplace else. And the thing is that even if you go after them, they pull the plug and they start up someplace else, and then if they arrest them, there's 20 more other people right behind them.
Don't fall for the Ukrainian medical alert. Hey, listen, Senator, thank you very much for being with us. Always good to see you. Do appreciate it, and appreciate having you with us as well, but that's all the time we've got. State Senator Bob Duff, our guest on this edition of Meet the Leaders. I'm David Smith, and we will look for you next time.